What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to episode 2 of Gun Guides. This is the series where I go into great detail with all of the stats of every one of the weapons in Black Ops 4. In today's episode, we're going to be moving on to the next assault rifle. We've already covered the ICR, now we're moving on to the Rampart-17. So as always, let's kick it off with the damage profile as well as the number of shots it takes to kill. The Rampart-17 has a damage profile of 46-37, which means it's going to be a 4 to 5 shot kill in core game modes. In hardcore, it's always going to be a 1-shot kill. Our rate of fire is 517 rounds per minute, which if you guys played Black Ops 3, this is identical to the Man of War, and with the Rampart, we don't have the option to use rapid fire. Our statistical minimum time to kill is going to be 348 milliseconds within the 4-shot kill range, and 464 milliseconds in the 5-shot kill range. Now another value I wanted to add from here on out with this series, and I didn't add this in the first episode, is the potential time to kill. This is essentially the time to kill that you can get with the right combination of attachments as well as headshots, because headshots are very important in this game compared to previous Call of Duty games. So our time to kill potential on the Rampart-17 when using high caliber and getting headshots, or hitting the upper chest when you're using high caliber 2, which is very important and we'll get into that a little bit later, is extremely fast for this game at 232 milliseconds. For those wondering for the last episode, since I didn't cover this, if you land one single headshot with the ICR, it will reduce your time to kill potential from 400 milliseconds down to 300 milliseconds. So quite a bit faster with the ICR, but not quite as fast as the Rampart. Moving on to the Rampart-17 versus an enemy with body armor, once again, just like with the ICR, it will only ever take you one extra shot to kill against somebody that has body armor equipped. This, by the way, applies to all ranges. Speaking of ranges, as you can see here, the Rampart-17's 4-shot kill range extends out to 30 meters, and then beyond that, it's going to be a 5-shot kill out to infinity. And with long barrel, we can double this range all the way out to 60 meters. As for hardcore game modes, the Rampart will always be a 1-shot kill unless you're shooting through some form of cover. This brings us to headshots, and with the Rampart, assuming you're not using high caliber, we get a headshot multiplier of just 1.1, which takes our headshot damage profile to a 50-40. What this means is within that 0 to 30 range, or the standard 4-shot kill range, if you can manage to hit all 3 shots to the head, it will be a 3-shot kill. It's not necessarily all that practical, especially with the recoil properties of this gun that we'll be looking at in a little bit, but at those longer ranges beyond 30 meters, all it takes is one single headshot mixed in with your body shots, and it will reduce the number of shots it takes to kill, and in this case it is practical to be able to land that one single headshot. So that's without high caliber. When we put high caliber on this gun, keep in mind high caliber 1 will give you a 1.3 times multiplier to the head, and high caliber 2 will extend that multiplier into the upper chest zone as well. Keep in mind this is only upper chest. If you hit them in the middle of the chest or in the stomach, it isn't going to be applying to them. But with this, we get a high caliber damage profile of 59-48. So as long as we're landing just one of our shots to either the head or the upper chest when we have high caliber 2, essentially the high caliber multiplier zone, it will always reduce the number of shots it takes to kill. So within the 4-shot kill range, 2 shots to the leg and 1 shot to the upper chest with high caliber 2 will be a kill. Similarly, in the standard 5-shot kill range, 3 shots to the body and 1 shot to the high caliber zone will end up being a kill. This is where the Rampart really shines, and it's absolutely worth grinding to get these high caliber attachments. This brings us to hipfire, and if you guys saw the previous episode, you'll know that all of the assault rifles currently have the exact same hipfire spread. Moving on to idle sway, as you can see here, there is definitely some idle sway with the Rampart-17, especially when you compare it to the ICR, which had practically no idle sway. When you're aiming down sight, your sights will be moving around a little bit, and this can affect your shot at those longer ranges. As for recoil, this is one of the downsides, in my opinion, to the Rampart-17. You can see the gun tends to kick initially to the right, and then it kicks upward, and then it just kind of sways back and forth as it gets to the maximum magnitude of its recoil. While this recoil doesn't necessarily kick extremely strong upwards or anything like that, the key thing I wanted to point out with the recoil on the Rampart-17, and the reason I don't like the recoil on the Rampart-17, is simply the recoil between the first and second shot. As you can see here, it always kicks fairly strong to the right more than anything, and horizontal recoil can be really hard to deal with sometimes because it will often take you off target, and I noticed this a lot with the Rampart-17. If at mid to somewhat longer range, I shoot my very first shot right in the middle of his chest, oftentimes my second shot will be off target. It will go right off to the right of the body, and I'll end up shooting the air. To compensate for this with the Rampart-17, I would recommend always aiming a little bit to the left on your target. So your first shot will hit him in the left arm as you're looking at him, his right arm but your left hand side. and then your second shot should be on target rather than shooting to the side of him. So while this is something you can compensate for, it's definitely something worth mentioning with the Rampart-17. As for the grip attachment, surprisingly, it doesn't really seem to help with this recoil between the first and second shot, and that's the worst part of the recoil of the Rampart-17. It definitely helps in the other area. You can see that the rest of the recoil pattern is tightened up quite a bit, but grip isn't really going to do a whole lot for you when it comes to that really annoying recoil between the first and second shot. Moving on to magazine capacity, we've got a fairly standard magazine capacity of 30 rounds with 90 in reserve, and once again, just like with the ICR, there is no option for extended mags on the Rampart. As for our standard reload add time, it's relatively slow for the assault rifle category at 1.72 seconds, but we can use the fast mag attachment on the Rampart-17, which will give us a reload add time of just 1.05 seconds, which is quite fast for assault rifles. Moving on to our handling and mobility stats, we get an aim down sight time of roughly 275 milliseconds, keeping in mind that these are hand-tested values, and they are rounded to the nearest frame, so they might be slightly off from what the hard-coded stats say, but they will still give you an accurate indication of how fast or how slow they are. But our standard aim down sight time is 275 milliseconds. Unfortunately, there is no option to use quick draw on the Rampart-17, so you are stuck to that value. And our standard sprint out time is 300 milliseconds, which is relatively slow, but with Gung Ho, we can reduce the standard sprint out time down to 150 milliseconds, or if we break our sprint by aiming down sight, we can essentially eliminate our sprint out time if we're using Gung Ho with the Rampart-17. As for our movement speed, it's standard for the assault rifle category at 95%. Same thing goes for our aim down sight strafe speed. This is also standard at 45%. So those are all the basic stats we have for the Rampart-17. Now let's start getting into my recommended attachments as well as class setups. First up, for optics, I generally don't run an optic on the Rampart-17, and if I do, it is just going to be a reflex sight. That's just the one I'm most comfortable with, but generally I really like the iron sights on this gun. As for attachments, the best attachments you could ever have on the Rampart-17 are absolutely high caliber 1 as well as high caliber 2. This is what really makes this gun shine. Aside from that, long barrel is also an excellent attachment because you will find yourself beyond 30 meters with a fair number of gunfights, so it is nice to double that, so basically all of your kills will end up being in that maximum damage range. Also, fast mags I feel like is a solid attachment that's not necessary by any means, but it does help out a little bit, so I like to throw that on if I've got room for it. And grip is still, I feel, a bit hit or miss on this gun. Like I said, it doesn't really seem to impact that recoil between the first and second shot, which is the real problem with the recoil with this gun. And therefore, as a result, I'm kind of torn as to whether or not grip is effective on this gun. It's not that it does nothing, it's just that it doesn't seem to help where it really needs to be helped. So now that we've got that covered, let's get into a couple great example classes I have for you guys with the Rampart-17. First up, this class is really designed around being relatively aggressive and just slaying with the Rampart. With this, we're using both of the high caliber attachments, long barrel, as well as fast mags. For our gear, we're using a stim shot, which is kind of a crutch for me. I really enjoy using that. As for equipment, we're just going to be using our special issue equipment since it's free. For perks, we've got Gung Ho to help us with that sprint out time, which I feel is necessary if you're trying to be super aggressive with this gun, as well as Dead Silence, which is also starting to become a bit of a crutch for me because footsteps are decently loud in multiplayer, and I really like not hearing my own footsteps, so that allows me to hear other things that are going on around me. So that would be my current go-to, somewhat aggressive class with the Rampart-17. Now let's move on to a bit more of a balanced class. With this one, we're going to be using, once again, high caliber 1 as well as high caliber 2. Those are really key for this gun. Long barrel as well, so I can pick people off at those longer ranges and still have that really fast time to kill. A reflex sight on this one, mainly because I had an extra class point at the end of this. And with this, we're using a launcher, which can come in handy in so many situations in this game. It's great for taking out enemy streaks. It's also excellent for taking out things like barbed wire, for instance. Once again, we're using stim shot as well as the special issue equipment. Our perks this time are going to be Engineer, which allows us to see equipment through walls, as well as spot enemy score streaks a little bit easier so we can shoot them down. Perk 2, we don't have Gung Ho this time. I feel with this one, I'm generally hanging back a bit more and trying to pick people off from a distance, so therefore I don't really need to rely on sprint out time too much. And finally, once again, we've got Dead Silence, just so I can hear what's going on around me a lot more effectively. So with that, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode of Gun Guides on the Rampart-17. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this gun, and it's 100% due to that weird recoil between the first and second shot. It's a little unpredictable at times. Sometimes you get a huge jump to the right, sometimes it doesn't really jump to the right that much at all. But in either case, I feel like that just ruins things for me far too often, and I end up losing gunfights due to some random recoil. That's not to say that I feel this gun is bad. I think this gun is very, very good and has a lot of excellent potential. I just find it to be a little bit on the inconsistent side when challenging people at mid to somewhat longer ranges due to that recoil. Of course, though, I'd like to know in the comments section below, what are your thoughts on the Rampart-17? Do you really like it? Do you dislike it? Let me know what you guys are thinking down below. And also, I'm interested from you guys, which gun would you like me to cover next for this series? Would you like me to just continue going through the assault rifles, so I cover all the assault rifles first, and then we can move on to something like SMGs next? Or would you prefer that I jump around between different weapon classes? If you guys have missed the first episode of Gun Guides, I will leave a link to the playlist down below. I've already covered the ICR like I said, and there's many more to come. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.
Yeah.